Welcome back to the Shared Practices podcast. This is another interview with Dr. Olya Banchik. We had so much to talk about last week that I had to have her back on, and we're going to do a part 3 next week. Her startup in North Carolina, I wanted to get a ton more details here. So this is kind of technically a break from our case acceptance season. I'm interviewing her for a few episodes here, and then she's going to interview me once I can talk about what's going on in my life right now. But loved this interview, the experiences that she has to share. So enjoy this episode with Dr. Olya Banchik. One frustrating thing when dealing with labs is waiting on a case and not knowing where stuff is. You or one of your team members has to call in, have the patient's info, you get a hold of the person, they go track it. It takes a while. It's inconvenient. Lab Pronto with Blue Sky Bio has introduced a solution that I hope we can get industry-wide for dental labs. And what they do is once you've submitted your case, they notify the dentist via email and text throughout the process as the order is being fulfilled. So step 1, you place the order. Step 2, they receive it. They send it to a network of top-tier labs with relevant knowledge and experience. Step 3, the lab with immediate available time claims the job, prepares the relevant parts or digital plan, and then step 4, the lab completes the order and returns the part or dental service to the dentist. So what do they offer right now? Orthodontic services including orthodontic plans, model printing, and aligner fabrication. Surgical guide services including treatment planning and surgical guide fabrication. In the future, we're looking at things like denture design and fabrication, crown and bridge, radiology report. It's pretty exciting. Lab Pronto is changing the way we interact with our labs. Lab Pronto from Blue Sky Bio. Okay, I have back with us today Dr. Olya Banchik. How's it going, Olya?
It's going great. How are you?
Doing good. No one is throwing up or throwing up blood at my house after my daughter's tonsillectomy a week and a half ago. We've had some scary moments and some stressful nights and very little sleep. And my wife was brilliant. She pulled the ultimate power play, which was to leave for New York for 5 days right after my daughter's surgery. So I was Mr. Dad here alone at the house with 2 kids and one of them struggling. So it was a
Oh my God.
long recovery, but we're doing better now.
Well, it sounds like you like a challenge, and your wife sounds amazing. I need to meet her one of these days. I don't know how she set that up, but good for her.
She loved New York. It was her first time going to New York, and she had an absolute blast with her 2 best friends. So I still maintain that it was brilliant on her part, and I guess I had to have work off anyways to help watch the kids. No, actually, it was the other way around. It was her New York trip was scheduled first, and then the surgery got scheduled later. And it was like, well, you're going to have to take work off to watch the kids here anyways. It's right before spring break. So I guess it fits. And so wouldn't do that again if I had the choice.
Well, you never know. With that surgery, you could have a really short recovery time. And I've seen that before. Or you can have a little bit of complication. And I'm glad your kiddo is okay.
Yeah, poor Abby. We ended up going back to the ER about 6 days afterwards, and they had to recauterize a certain spot. And it's just one of those, like, seeing your kid suffer, seeing your kid throw up blood, like, it's just all very painful and very stressful. And I'm glad she's back to her happy, normal self. So how about you? How are you doing?
I am doing great. Just kind of plugging along. We've got our startup. We are in this is month 3 now, the 3rd month. So we are just in systems, kind of establishing all the systems mode. And we're probably going to be in that kind of stage for the next few months. So just working hard on that, training the staff, growing, and focusing on taking care of our patients. So, yeah.
So remind us, you moved from Vegas to North Carolina. Is that correct?
We did. Yes, we moved last June.
And to outside of... And then this is where I forget my North Carolina geography already. It's only been a week.
We're right outside of Charlotte, and we're right in a suburb called Waxhaw. So it's located in a really rural area, but at the same time, super close to Charlotte. where you can access all the city life.
Cool.
Yeah, we're in the country, which is really fun.
Awesome. Well, so this is all pretty fresh for you. So we kind of started to get into your journey into this startup, and we looked at the analysis that you did of local dentists to kind of see what niches you could fill and what strategies you could do. But let's go back to the beginning of this startup. So how far out, like when did you start the process on this startup? You moved there June. Did the startup start before then or after then?
Yeah, so we've been looking at this space for a while. And this is something that seems to be happening in all of the busier markets around the country, where if you want to do a startup and you want a certain location, you really have to jump on it and get to it while it's still in the dirt stage. Once it seems that once there's a shell up, there's a dentist in there if the location's favorable and if the number, it's true. It's impossible. It's impossible. So you either have to look for existing practices or you have to be willing to wait. And lucky for us, we found this space about a year before we ended up moving, maybe a little less. And it was just a matter of figuring out which specific unit we wanted. And we chose the end cap. And I think I kind of talked about the advantage of doing that in the previous episode. Turned out fantastic. So, yeah.
How did you find this end cap unit? Remind us, were you like looking through a broker? Were you driving around? Were you on Google Maps? Were you on LoopNet? Like, what were you specifically doing to search for real estate?
Oh, we had a broker. We were living in Vegas and we already knew that we were moving. So we were in the process of selling our practices. And that was really, it was a lot of work. So didn't have a whole lot of time where we could spend driving around this area. So we relied on a commercial real estate broker that's known for dental practices in this area. I think he's one of the only guys that really, specializes in that. And when we started working with him, we said, this is what we're looking for. We had certain criteria.
Do you mind sharing any of that criteria, like either square footage or, kind of what were the specifics that you told him?
There were really just a few. Obviously, demographics had a lot to do with it, and we wanted to be in a growing area. So we knew that. But also, we were really wanting street visibility. Okay. And we were hoping to really not be in a retail center, but to be visible, right off the street. You know what I'm saying? Not hidden inside a shopping mall somewhere. We wanted to be where the traffic is at. And these locations just did not exist. So when we were looking, there were two. It was this one and a second one, and that's all they had. So we also knew we had an idea of where we wanted to live. And one of our requirements was a lifestyle change. So we wanted to live super close to where the practice was just to make it easier and not have commute. And Charlotte has really bad traffic, like really, really bad traffic. So especially here in the suburban area where the infrastructure just does not support the growth. So we really wanted to make sure we lived close to where the office was. And so in deciding the two locations, one of them seemed really good, but it had this issue. And it was actually my husband that picked up on it really, really quickly. He's like, there's no good way to come in and out of this parking lot. The building was great. The visibility was great. The traffic was really good.
It's like you can see the practice from the street corner, but you're like, how do I get to it?
Yeah. How do I get to it? And then there was no parking behind it. Like where are patients going to park? And there's all these other businesses in there. And we could just see that the issues that we were going to have. Like if patients can't find a parking spot, what are the chances they're going to make it to their appointments? They're going to get frustrated and, people
stressed every time they're already coming to the dentist office. They don't want to be there. And then they're like frustrated that they couldn't find a spot. And then there's all these other businesses.
Yeah. So that second location it just wasn't going to work. So it just left us with one. So we really didn't have a choice. And we picked this one.
Did you have a house picked out first? Because, you said lifestyle, you wanted to live close to the practice. So did you pick out the practice location first and then find a house? Or did you know exactly where you wanted to live house-wise and then you picked out the practice?
Practice first. It was practice first. I kind of always think it should be practice first, as long as it's within the area that, you want to live. And again, it depends on what phase of life you're in, right? For us, we're kind of in the phase where we wanted to be a little more comfortable. We wanted to have less of a drive. We've done the long commutes. We've done all of that already.
Right.
So we just wanted easy. And there's, it was actually hard to find a house also, but there were definitely options. And we live pretty much right next door to the practice. So it's nice.
That's awesome. What square footage requirements and how many ops did you want to be able to have?
Yeah, so that was a tricky part because we were used to being in a larger, more busy practice that was about 400 square feet. And
you said 2,400?
Our one of our old practices, it was 2,400 square feet and it had seven ops.
Okay.
But we were worried because we're new to town. We don't know anybody. Nobody knows us. And really, there were no guarantees. It's not like we had a ton of friends and family that were going to refer patients or relationships. We were just kind of relying on our skill and that's about it. And the marketing efforts.
Sure.
So we didn't want to overdo it and go big. Well, we chose 1,790 square feet. And by chose, I mean that was pretty much all that was available. So yeah, that was our space if we wanted an end cap.
So, and here's the thing is that like some people think, oh, once I'm at a certain point in my career, like I'm just going to be confident about everything. But at the same time, there's always kind of that feeling in your stomach, like, is this going to work out? Like how we want it to? And are we going to be able to grow this and start from scratch? Did you have any kind of nervousness about this? Or were you just kind of, you knew it would work, but you're trying to be conservative? Or was there still just like a little bit of trepidation?
Oh, no, there was a lot of trepidation because who starts over? I mean, just what we were doing seemed so crazy. And yeah, we were scared. There are no guarantees. And you don't know how things are going to go. You don't know how patients are going to respond to you. You have faith in your clinical skills and you have faith that you know what you're doing after so many years, but there are no guarantees. There are no guarantees that patients are going to love you. There are no guarantees that they're going to show up. And it's a scary thing. So I can absolutely relate to what all of my, dentist clients go through when they choose to do a startup. It's a very scary thing, no matter how many years of experience you have.
Well, and I think conversely that when the times that dentists get themselves in trouble is when they make the opposite set of assumptions and they think, oh, I've done this successfully once, so now I know exactly what I'm doing and this is going to be no problem. But it's a different set of circumstances, a different set of market pressures, and they don't plan for slow growth. They don't plan for challenges, and they kind of go overboard and are overconfident. So it's almost, and I wonder if having coached others yourself with transitions, if that kind of gave you a healthy level of not skepticism, but just planning, conservative planning, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. It does. And it keeps you really grounded. I think I saw something online one of the days and it said something like you have to wake up every morning thinking that there's someone, down the street that's going to do things better than you, or, they're going to have longer hours. They're going to fight for your patients. So we kind of wake up every morning determined that we're going to take the best care of our patients. We are going to go above and beyond. We will answer our cell phones on the weekends if a patient needs us. So I think the mindset that we have is we are going to just go and do anything that's possible to make this a success, whatever it takes. So if we give our best to these patients, we're hoping that they feel that and they sense our commitment and our desire to always do the right thing for them and to take the best care of them. So we're hoping to gain their trust and the goodwill and have them be our patients forever. So I think we were just prepared to work.
That's awesome. And I love that attitude. And even though, like we've said, you guys have been successful before and you've done this before, and in a variety of circumstances, just that determination is the difference between success and struggling. And I think the same thing with our podcast. Like, I think just because people have liked our show before, if we don't continue to put out great episodes and we don't put out great content, like, we're going to lose people and they're not going to listen to us anymore. So I think it's a good thing to stay hungry and stay humble. Knowing all this, so you said 1790, how many ops did you want to fit, and how much dentistry were you planning on doing versus your husband, split schedule versus the same schedule versus, what was the kind of plan for the eventual size of this and the types of patients and the procedure mix of this practice? What was your vision for this practice?
Yeah, sure. So my vision for this practice was, so we have 5 ops.
Okay.
And we have a 6th op that is plumbed, and it's a doctor's office for now. So we can turn it into an op at any time. So really 6 ops. And I do practice clinically, but I have kind of taken a step back from that just a little bit.
Sure.
I've gotten just a little bit busier with working with my dental clients. So my husband does most of our clinical dentistry, and I do most of the management. I still jump in and help him if his schedule gets busy and he needs me to jump in and help him see patients. So, I'm absolutely ready to do that. But the plan was to have a small family practice.
Cool.
We really weren't looking to be super busy. We were looking to just small family practice, be part of the community, and just do high quality dentistry.
Is there a specific procedure mix that your husband and yourself really prefer? Or were you, like you said, a family practice? So just to be able to do whatever your patients need and refer out whatever you don't feel comfortable with? What's the procedure mix that you were looking at? And then the demographic of your ideal patient?
Yeah, our demographic is excellent. They're, middle to high kind of, income. And as far as the procedures, my husband is amazing clinically. And I always say that. I'm not just saying that because he's my husband and he's my dentist, but he places implants. We have a cone beam. So he does it very, in a very calculated way. He only does the cases that he knows are, he's careful about case selection.
Right.
And he will refer to perio or to oral surgery whenever it's outside of his scope. So he pretty much does everything in-house. And I think that really helps with keeping it a family practice, because once people start to get comfortable, and we really cater to our patients too, we really just go so far above and beyond for each and every patient, that once they get comfortable, a lot of times they don't want to be referred. And, if we can do a procedure in-house, he will do it. He will refer molar, endo, I'd say maybe 60% of the time. So, but he's able to do a lot of it. And I think that's been really helpful in helping the practice grow.
Okay, cool. So it sounds like he has a extremely well-rounded kind of super GP skill set where he can pick and choose the stuff that's predictable and slam dunks, and he can send out the stuff that he just either doesn't want to mess with or feels would be better handled by a specialist. But that gives him a whole extra set of options and things that he can do for your guys' patients. So that helps that he's got that kind of expanded skill set. Is that fair to say?
It is 100% fair to say. I think that was really the one thing that was giving me some peace and comfort, is that faith that I had in his clinical skills.
Cool.
And his treatment planning skills. Like, I've always known how good he is, and I felt comfortable doing a startup because I had that. And then, of course, on the business side of things, we also knew how to set up all of our systems, how to train our staff, how to protect the practice from various exposures. And so I think all those things combined as scary as it was, I did have the confidence that we will be okay.
Cool. No, that makes a huge difference. So now you've picked out this space because at the end of the day, it's the only space that meets all your requirements in the area that you need, and you're like, okay, we're going to make this space work. Was your dental real estate broker, was he able to kind of negotiate either the costs or the working capital or any of those things with the space? Do you have any advice in terms of negotiating these spaces for dentists who are looking at a space like this?
Absolutely. So there's a whole kind of process that we go through when we are negotiating the lease, and all of these, everything is a negotiation, and everything is kind of, pulls and levers, and you have to know what to ask for. You obviously have to know the comps of the area, and that's where a really good real estate agent comes in. Or, there's always LoopNet. You can do your own research, right?
Right.
So you should really be familiar with what's acceptable in your area. So then you work through the different aspects of the lease. So you find out, what is it that the landlord's looking for? So obviously, us as dentists, we are a sure thing for the landlords. They love us. Our default rates are very, very low. And
you're very committed to the space with all the build out that we do.
Right. Yeah, no kidding. Very committed to the space, even with the tenant improvements that the landlord provides. We put a lot of money into it. So I think that they're very motivated to have a dentist in their space. And we are willing to sign a longer lease also. So other businesses might not want to stay there for 10 years, right? And we do. So, we negotiate that, absolutely talk about the rent increases and pay attention to what percentage those rent increases are every year. Or we need to know what the cams are, the triple nets, and whether that's going to be capped, right?
Do you feel like without getting into crazy specifics, was there anything specifically on this deal that you're really happy with what you ended up with? What, like, they came to the table, here was the lease, and then your broker went back and kind of explained to them all these good things about you being a dentist in this space, and you were able to get like a win here or there. Was there anything specific that comes to mind?
It was a really good lease. I felt that the landlord was really reasonable, and I think also that they were very familiar with our broker.
Oh, cool.
And on top of that, we had an attorney who was also local. It really, really helps to have this team of experts that are fighting for you. And so we had a great attorney. We had when we were actually negotiating the lease, the broker put together the letter of intent. And the truth is, these days it's the landlord's market, right? So sort of at their mercy. And I felt really comfortable with our landlord, with the terms. They were reasonable and easy to work with, but that's not always the case.
Okay, cool. So you had, between your local knowledge, your local broker, your local attorney, you had enough knowledge and comfort to be able to, because you started off by saying everything's a negotiation, but at the end of the day, you didn't have to negotiate a whole ton on this space. It sounds like they came to the table very reasonably, and your broker and your attorney kind of looked at everything and said, no, this is pretty reasonable. And so it's I feel like sometimes people, when they hear the phrase everything's a negotiation, they feel like they have to win every time they go into one of these. And if they don't like move the price down or have some win that they feel like they can take away from it, then they feel like, oh man, I left something on the table. I should have pushed harder here. But it sounds like you guys didn't have to do that. And it was kind of not necessarily that you're at their mercy, but it was a fair offering.
Yeah, we did do our fair share of negotiation. So I don't want to, mislead anyone and say that we didn't negotiate, because we did. We got really high tenant improvement compensation. So we did get that. We negotiated a remove of our personal liability after the first 24 months, which is a huge win. Huge win. So there were a few things that were really important to us, and they were willing to work with us, most likely because of the strength of us as tenants and just the fact that dentists, like I said, just our profession.
And having those tenant improvements as a startup, Like if you can negotiate more tenant improvement, I mean, that's just like less money you have to borrow, more working capital, however you want to look at it. It's just more available that you can build your practice with. So that's huge.
Exactly. And it's so important to have a good relationship with your landlord because you need them, they need you. So if you can kind of keep things moving and realize that, yes, you can negotiate and yes, you can, be aggressive in certain areas, you also have to be willing to accept that this is a business for them. And as long as they're reasonable, you have to look at the big picture. And if this is the only space you have, that was the case for us, then you got to be willing to accept the terms or walk away.
Sure. In terms of tenant improvements, for people who aren't familiar with that term, because we haven't talked about startups or lease negotiation in a while, explain to the listeners what tenant improvements are, and then what's a reasonable range? Like what's the most you've ever seen of tenant improvements granted, and what's the least, and what's kind of average? And it's going to depend on the area and the space. I get all that. But if someone has no idea, they're like, is this good of a tenant improvement? Is this bad? Is this, what would you say to that?
Yeah. So the tenant improvement is just one piece of it, right? So there's all these other things also that we consider such as rent abatements, right? So how much time do you have from the first day that you break ground, the building is handed to you basically by the landlord to when you're actually going to start paying rent. And that can vary, that can be anywhere between, 150 days to 180 days. So that's something else to think about. But so as far as the tenant improvements, I've seen them be anywhere between, $26 in certain areas. I've seen them go as high as $50. That's per square foot. So that's the money that the landlord gives you after you have completed your construction process. So that's, they just reimburse you for the improvements that you have made in a space. Yeah, it can be all over the map. The average I'm seeing now is somewhere between $30 and $40, I would say. And again, depends on where. So geography is really important here, and the market. The market's driving all of this, and it's the landlord's market.
So let me think. I'm just trying to think out loud for listeners. So if you had a 2,000 square foot space and it was $40 a square foot, is that like 80,000 if I'm doing my math right?
Exactly. So basically what happens is once you are done with your construction, you provide, the lien release from your contractor, and you provide a few other documents, and they just send you a check for $80,000.
Cool. And it's also good to know that you're saying this is when it's done, because maybe people are thinking, oh, I'm going to be able to use my tenant improvements to pay my contractors. But if it's after the fact, not before, then the bank's got to give you that money up front, and then you're being reimbursed later.
So this is an excellent point. And this is something that we talk about when we talk about lending. And it's something that's really important to have in your mind, because most of us, we go into this project with a budget in mind. And part of this budget is this TI money. So we think, okay, if our budget's, let's just say $500,000, and then we're going to get $80,000 in TIs, then really we're only going to have to come up with $420,000. And we have to remember that the landlord's not even going to release the TI until the contractor has given you a signed lien release. And the contractor won't give you a signed lien release until he has been paid in full.
I didn't know that. This is new information for me. So, and I feel like I've been, researching and talking about this kind of stuff. So this is kind of like those little details that if you think about it the wrong way, you can shoot yourself in the foot if you don't realize all the details.
Absolutely. They all want that. And it makes sense, right? As a landlord, you want to make sure that your tenant has paid the contractor and there's no lien on the space, right? So yeah. So you have to be really careful with your budgeting and your working capital, and make sure you ask the right questions when you're dealing with your lender.
Oh, totally. Yeah, totally. And do lenders kind of vary on when they release different chunks of money? If you're doing a startup, do they give it to you all up front, or does some of it happen? How does that work with lending? And now that we're talking about timeline of money released.
Yeah, no, usually. So they normally do not give you all the money up front. basically do draws, and those draws are based upon certain milestones that your contractor will reach. And you have to submit certain documents in order to get the money released. Now, the lenders usually know that this is the case, and they're all kind of different in how they work. So it's really important to talk to them about it up front, to talk to your contractor and see, how they usually work and how what they expect from you as far as the payments go. So all of that kind of comes together, and you just have to have a clear picture in your head about how the funds are going to be distributed from your loan.
Is there, and this will be the last question on kind of like timeline of money, but this is something I thought of. Is there some costs that you're not going to have the bank's approval and funds released for that you need to be prepared for upfront? So it's like, if I'm doing demographics research, if I'm hiring a broker or hiring an attorney to negotiate a space, a lot of times that might be pre-lending approval. So like, what kind of budgets should people expect to have pre-money from the bank, if anything?
That's excellent. Excellent question. And you have certain costs that you incur before. One of the other things is that the landlord, at the time at which you're going to sign your lease, the landlord is going to want a deposit, right?
Okay.
And a lot of it's the first month's rent. A lot of times it's first and last month's rent or a security deposit. So you're looking at, $10,000 on average, probably more right there, right? So if your rent, for your space is $5,000, then first and last month's rent is $10,000. So you have to come up with that. And that usually happens right when you sign the lease, which means that your loan has not been dispersed yet. So then you have a lot of times when the loans get dispersed, you have origination fees, right? You have rate lock fees.
Do you pay those out of pocket, or are those rolled into the loan?
You usually pay those out of pocket because you can negotiate that. There's also certain things that can be waived based on your relationship with the bank. So you kind of have to know which questions to ask and what the bank is looking for. And then a lot of times, like I said, they're willing to work with you on those fees. So yeah, you will have the fee that you're going to pay the attorney to review the lease, which I always recommend that everybody does work with an attorney. So yeah, so you do have a few things that you have to pay for usually before the loan is dispersed.
So if we were to kind of generalize, which is dangerous, like would having 30 to 50K on hand be like a nice buffer for just those upfront costs, not to mention the delays that might happen in construction, that might happen in closing, and that might happen, with the doors opening. So you got to feed yourself and your family if you're not working somewhere else. What's a nice, I guess, a healthy place to be at in terms of liquidity?
Oh, yeah. Good question. I would say, $50,000 is definitely a great amount. I would say minimum,
Yeah.
Because there's nothing scarier than running into payments that you weren't anticipating. So $50,000 is probably a good amount to start with. But the most important thing is to have your budget written and detailed before you start. You have to I usually have 3 budgets. The first budget is our construction budget. And that's a whole conversation. But so that's the first one. The second budget is the operating budget for your first year. And this budget basically puts all your expenses into a spreadsheet, right? And it kind of gives you an idea of what your break-even point needs to be for this first year, so that you know what your production has to be daily, just so that you can pay your bills. And the third budget is your equipment and supply budget, where you list kind of all the equipment that you're going to need, and then you start to look for the company that you're going to work with to provide all that, and then your instruments and supplies. So then you kind of put the budgets together, and then that's how you know how much money you're going to need.
So construction budget, build out budget, your break even first year budget, and then your equipment and supplies budget.
Exactly.
So one of the challenges that we're asking you to take on in this season is to think about your practice from the perspective of a patient. So to go through the patient experience of how they're checked in, treated, checked out, and part of that is impacted by the physical layout of your office. Whether you realize that the layout of the office that you're in is less than perfect, or you're doing a startup and want to have the best layout and don't know where to start, Design Ergonomics is here to help. We've partnered with Design Ergonomics because they've been doing this for 20 years, and they know exactly how to create office floor plans that flow, make sense, and feel natural to your patients. And unlike maybe some of the free floor plans that you'll get from suppliers, these are going to maximize your square footage and are not just designed to get you to spend more with that supply company. The first thing that they do is called a blocking diagram, which is basically just a conceptual outline of your practice without all the little nitty-gritty details. That way, you don't end up with a high-end consult room sandwiched in between a compressor, an autoclave, and the bathroom. You laugh, but sometimes this happens. It's super easy. Their team can remotely evaluate your layout and walk you through your design to make sure you're maximizing productivity and allowing for future growth. To help you get started today, Design Ergonomics is providing a special offer to Shared Practices listeners. If you go to www.desergo.com and enter the promo code DESIGN today, it's 2 separate words, you get $500 off. That's right, $500 off their already specially priced blocking diagram and floor plan bundle. This discount is limited time only, and it's only for Shared Practices listeners. Go to www.desergo.com, promo code DESIGN today for $500 off your blocking diagram and floor plan bundle. And so that, some of those, like your first year budget, you're not gonna have to pay all of that up front. But you're gonna need a couple months of operating expenses of that budget. But would you recommend that your working capital covers almost that first whole year? Like, what would you, of that first year's operating expenses budget, what would you budget for working capital?
Yeah, so your working capital is usually a couple of months.
Okay.
Usually it's anywhere between, or I shouldn't say that, it's a little more than that. So it's anywhere between $50,000 and $100,000. Average is 50, 75, something like that. That's what the lenders will normally provide for you, because it takes a while, right? So even if your production is whatever it is, your first few months, it takes a while to get the insurance checks coming in, to get the payments,
right?
But you're still paying your staff. You're paying your rent now. You're, depending on the terms and how your loan is structured, whether you have a deferment on your payments, you may or may not have loan payments that you're going to have to start making. So you have to think about all of that.
Okay, cool. So I think this was really helpful for our audience to realize why doing a startup straight out of dental school isn't always an option. And not only that clinical comfort level, but also just kind of having some money set aside. And that's why some of our listeners have been able to pull off acquisitions straight out of school. But even then, George and others have talked about a lot of those costs that you have before that loan is dispersed. You need to have some money set aside. So even an acquisition, you're going to have money set aside before you go into that. So and the more the better usually.
Oh, yes. The more the better. And one of the things to consider, one question is sometimes we say, well, if it's a startup, I'm going to open 1 or 2 days a week, and then I'm going to have a job as an associate, which a lot of times you have to do. But what ends up happening is, and depending on your location, depending on, again, how busy you're going to get, you're going to have patients calling that just broke a tooth. So they're an emergency and they want to see you that day, and you're working somewhere else. So you lose the patient. Now, do you still have staff who's at your office, who's answering phones so that you don't miss these phone calls? How do you handle that? How do you kind of find a balance between being able to work somewhere else while you're still able to keep your practice running and not lose any of those patients that may need appointments? Does that make sense?
And it seems like almost everyone I've talked with has thought, oh, I'm going to work somewhere else part-time and then I'm going to do this. And then in the end, they just shoot that plan and they just say, screw it. I can't do this. I can't do both. Or the employer finds out about the startup and they fire them. I haven't heard the other job work out that often. Is that fair enough to say?
I think so. It's hard. I would say that it's possible, but I wouldn't rely on it. And there's certain, it's most, corporate type of practices or DSO types of practices that would support someone that they know is actively in the process of a startup. But if you're working for a private practice and you're doing a startup, the chances that the employer is going to be okay with it, that's probably not going to happen.
Unless you're driving an hour, but you know what I mean? Like, unless it's remote enough that there's no overlap. This has been really good. This has been super informative to kind of think about the finances of things. So now let's go back into the logistics of the actual, okay, you've got the space, you're going to do the layout. How did you guys come up with your layout? Did you hire an architect? Did you work with a company like Design Ergonomics? Did you guys do it yourself? How did you come up with your layout for this specific space?
Yeah, so I love the design process. So I actually drew the space myself.
Yes, cool.
So yeah, I did. I knew exactly what I wanted. And my husband and I, we just put our heads together. We drew it out. And one of the things I encountered was people were saying that, 1790, you're not going to fit this many ops in there comfortably. And we were looking for a space that would be really light and airy and not heavy and, small ops. So we were getting kind of discouraged. And then, so we just drew it and it has everything we need and it feels really spacious and open. It helps that all the ops except one have really nice big windows.
Cool.
So you get a lot of daylight. It's very light. So yeah, we just drew it. And we did. So we ended up, after it was drawn, of course, we needed an architect and, to come up with architectural drawings and then mechanical, electrical, plumbing drawings. So the finalized what we were trying to do. And one of the things that we kind of ran into a little kind of bump is that I was really determined to have a small private office, that would eventually be an op, but I really wanted a private office with a separate entrance. So we actually had to work with a landlord and they allowed us to add an additional door. So they kind of moved things around a little bit. So we got lucky too. Yeah. That was really important. So
that's cool. So do you have any like startup schools of thought that you either subscribe to or really influenced by? On our show, we're all typically huge fans of Breakaway and their layouts, but we know that they got a lot of their stuff from other people in dentistry that have been doing this for a while and, like Design Ergonomics, like others. What were there any influences that you had on kind of startup philosophy or operatory layout? Did you guys have cabinets on the sides or not? Did you have, roll in, roll out stuff that allowed you to maximize that space? How did you lay this out and were there any influences?
Yeah. So one of the things that I really look at, and it's one of the first things that I like to look at with my clients, is I like a space that is regular in shape, right? Because anytime you get any kind of irregular sort of angles or anything that's not, a standard shape, that's where you lose square footage. So it was really important to have it be this rectangle. But at the same time, you want to make sure, because nowadays it seems that they're building these buildings that end up with these really narrow spaces on the inside. Yeah. So you have to be careful there too, because you don't want to be limited by that. You kind of have to find that perfect balance. So we did attend Breakaway.
Okay.
And it's funny because by the time we attended Breakaway, I had my plan drawn and by myself, not with an architect yet. And Scott Luna had a field day with it and he was like, oh.
You showed it to him? You like pulled it out?
Well, he asked, he's like, if there's anybody here that already has a plan, just submit it and I'll tear it apart. So I said, yeah, but I'll sign up. Go ahead. So he put our plan up and he was like, everything you're doing is wrong and your plan sucks. And well, we still did it. It worked out really well.
That's awesome.
Scott is brilliant. He's brilliant. So we did use a lot of the Breakaway principles. We did not do side cabinets in 4 of the rooms. The 5th one's a little bigger. It's kind of more of a surgical room, procedure room.
Yeah.
So we did the 12 o'clock.
Okay.
The rear cabinets. My husband really wanted rear delivery, which I thought was interesting because most dentists that practice, for a long time, they usually don't love that. It's not their favorite. I think continental is what most dentists really, really love. So I did have a lot of concerns with that, how he was going to feel working with rear delivery, because he never has before. So, but we went ahead and did it. What I personally loved about it is the clean look of the room that you're able to have, because you don't have all these cords hanging in front of the patient. The patient doesn't see, the scary instruments. They kind of walk into this living room type of a operatory. So that turned out really well, and he's doing okay with the rear delivery. He hasn't really complained much.
So far, yeah.
So far, 3 months, hopefully. Hopefully it's going to stay that way. So we did that. And we did, as far as sinks, we did a sink in the hallway. We got lucky because of the county laws. We only needed one restroom. Okay. So that was a bit of a compromise. Some doctors really feel that they need to have a private restroom, and I totally get that. We didn't have to do that. So it's just, it's one restroom. We have a sink in the hallway. There's a sink in the surgical suite, the operatory room, and that's it.
Okay, cool. So saving some space there, definitely.
Yeah, save some space. It's laid out really, really nicely. It flows very well. It's very open. So there's really nothing that it doesn't have. There wasn't anything that we couldn't fit in. We even have we have a cone beam, and North Carolina law requires that you have a door.
Oh.
Whenever you have a cone beam. Yeah, okay. So it's like a little room.
Interesting.
So we did that.
And do you have a pano as well as a cone beam?
It's just one and the same. Okay. So it's just setting. So same. It's the same exact machine, and you just choose if you want to run it as a cone beam or a pano.
Cool.
Yeah.
Is there any other either design choices or material choices or layout, things that you just are super glad that you did and you'd highly recommend to others?
Let's see. So overhead lights, that's always a hot topic, right?
Okay.
Scott says absolutely nobody needs overhead lights. And I don't disagree. It can be challenging because some of us that have been practicing for a while, you really get used to it.
Oh yeah. I'm so spoiled by overhead lights. Like I can do it with just loops, but like, man, sometimes you just want more.
Right. I have a hard time. I don't know. The headlights on your loops, there's all these wires and it's heavier and it's like one more thing to worry about. But the advantage is obviously, other than the cost savings, because a nice light like that, anywhere between $3,000 to $5,000, right?
Right. Per light. Yeah.
The light, the overhead light.
Yeah.
Right. Like
overhead.
Yeah.
And you multiply that by 5 to 7 operatories. Yeah, it adds up.
It adds up. So my recommendation is try it without, but make sure you reinforce the ceiling. So you can always add one in if you want to. So that would be, one word of advice is making sure that you reinforce for the overhead lights. Don't put them in. See how you do. See how your hygienist does. Our hygienist, she kind of struggled in the beginning, and we went through a few different loops lights for her.
Okay.
To make, because we wanted her to be really comfortable, right? We didn't want anything to kind of make her, to just, we wanted her to be happy.
Sure.
So if she wasn't going to be able to work without the overhead light, the good thing is that we were prepared to put one in. And so far, she's doing really well.
Cool. So overhead lights is one that you guys are experimenting without, but you've planned just in case. Did you guys do TVs, like multiple TVs or one per operatory? What'd you do there?
Yeah. So we have it reinforced to where we can have TVs overhead in all the ops. Right now, we have an overhead TV in just one of the ops. And all of them have TVs at the 6 o'clock at the foot of the chair.
Okay. So
patients can watch TV. We're kind of figuring out how to best mount the TVs over the patient's head. So we're working that out. But yeah, all the rooms have TVs, and we did Sonos for our sound system.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, we didn't wire for speakers.
So you just have like a chain of Bluetooth speakers that all will kind of play the same music?
No, I think they're able to play different music. It depends which computer each speaker is connected to. So So they're able to play different music in different operatories, depending on what the patient wants to hear. And same with, the front of the office. The other thing is the wall-mounted X-ray units. We went all Nomad.
Really?
All Nomad. Yes, no wall-mounted units, and it's working out great.
That's amazing. Okay, interesting. So how many Nomads do you have for the whole office? Because you have 5 operatories. So how many Nomads and how many sensors for your practice right now?
We have 2 sensors and we have 1 Nomad.
Okay.
So yeah, we haven't had any issues. We used to use a Nomad in our previous practice. And what I found was that even though a lot of the rooms did have the wall-mounted units, the assistants and the hygienists were preferring the Nomad because your FMX, the amount of time that it would take for them to get through an FMX was so much less with a Nomad. Yeah. And my concern was like, well, what if they, worry about radiation? And they're so safe. They are so safe. Nobody's ever expressed concern about it. And they do wear those sensors that track. Anybody that's taking x-rays in the state of North Carolina with a Nomad, they have to have those little sensors, the monitoring sensors. So
funny story about the Nomad. One of my mentors in undergrad, there was a dentist who would teach part-time at BYU named Dr. Vogel. And he was one of the inventors and founders. The Nomad is his thing. And he created it to be able to do charitable dentistry abroad. And that's actually how I learned how to take x-rays, was on a mission trip in Guatemala. And that was my job for a few days, was just using a handheld Nomad to take a bunch of x-rays on these patients coming through. And we had oral surgeons. We had turned an entire church building into dental hospital. We had, I think, almost 20 dentists and then multiple oral surgeons and hygienists and a bunch of dental student volunteers. And so I was at the x-ray station and the oral surgeons wanted the apices of the third molars to kind of see where they were in relation to the IAN. And so that was my first experience learning radiographs, was Nomads trying to get apices of third molars. And it was a blast. And I was like, oh yeah, this is just completely normal. I didn't realize how rare it was to be using kind of Nomads on a frequent basis. But I always wondered how a startup would do with just a Nomad. And it sounds like it's not a problem at all.
Not at all. Not at all. And they're safe, they're portable. There's really nothing that I would change about them. People kind of say that the battery dies really quickly. So we always have a spare battery that charges. Cool. And new ones actually have a much better battery life than the old ones did. So we have no complaints. And we did reinforce our wall just in case, to have the wall mounted units, but that's not going to happen. There's just no need.
The other thing is the jiggle. I mean, if you use one of those wall mounted units, even though, if you dial it in and everything's perfect, it's supposed to be pretty stable, but you just watch and it kind of bounces when you walk away from it and go and push the button. And if you waited long enough, it would stop oscillating, but the patient's sitting there with the sensor in their mouth and are uncomfortable. So you're usually trying to rush. So I found that the quality of the Nomad doesn't turn out worse. Oftentimes it turns out better because you can hold it more stable often than the oscillating wall-mounted unit, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That has always been such a problem. Even in a brand new office, sometimes you get, Shine or Bank or whoever to come and to tighten those screws in those wall-mounted units, and they're always moving. So I know that's totally a problem. So yeah, this solves that. And I think we're seeing more and more startups. Now there's a whole different way in which most startups are being put together. And the Nomad's a huge part of it. And most new dentists are not doing the wall-mounted units. It's less expensive too, because you basically have access to an X-ray unit in every room, right? So just from a flow standpoint, it's much easier.
And even when you're starting to do surgical procedures, and say you want to do a pilot drill and get a angulation shot on your implant, if you don't have to roll out some big wall-mounted unit and clear away all your instruments to make room for it, it's you've just got that Nomad and you take a shot and then you drive forward. So it's in certain procedures, and endo the same way. I think both endo and implants, it's more convenient.
100%. And the assistants and the hygienists, they prefer it. They get used to it. They love it. And again, in our state, the laws are different. So the only difference is you have to lock it up at night. So you have to have a locking cabinet for the Nomad. But, other than that, it's been fantastic. I couldn't go back.
I love the state laws. And that actually, when I was doing some humanitarian work with Dr. Vogel, he's since passed away. He had, unfortunately, I can't remember if it was jaw cancer. It was like osteosarcoma or something awful, and ended up passing away from it. But I remember him telling me about getting the Nomad licensed in every state and cleared in every state, and what a nightmare that was. So you got to love that, like, you got to lock it up in your state because they're afraid you're going to go shoot x-rays at people. It's like, what are they worried about? But oh well, it is what it is.
It's like it's a deadly weapon. Yeah, I don't know. But North Carolina, it's so different here, and this is just one of them. So not only, like I said, you lock it up, you have to have a full door on wherever your cone beam is, and all the assistants and hygienists, whoever takes X-rays, they have to wear the monitoring badges. So in other states, that's usually not a requirement.
Yeah.
Optional. Exactly.
So let's get into one last question before we have to wrap it up for today, because we're almost at an hour here. What did you do for a contractor? So you've drawn it, you've got a breakaway, Scott made fun of it, you said, screw it, we're doing it anyways. How did you find either a dental specific contractor or a non-dental specific contractor? How did you find that person?
Yeah. And this is actually something that I feel was really important in the experience that we had with this particular project. So we had a recommendation we had probably about 5 or 6 contractors that were recommended to us that we interviewed. And there was one contractor that was dental specific, and 100% of the people whose practices he built, when you talked about him, people would just rave and they would say he's amazing. And, sometimes you walk into a meeting and you meet someone and you just realize, wow, I really just love this person. And that's how we felt about him when we first met him. He wasn't the cheapest, but at the same time as we were doing this, we were coming off of a crazy, gone bad house remodel.
You know what a bad contractor could be at this point.
Oh my God. Just when I say nightmare, it was a nightmare. So when we met Rick Whitley, who's Colony Builders, I really just liked him, and I felt like I could trust him. And we knew he wasn't the cheapest. And he also kind of knew that we knew what we were doing. So it was like an interesting dynamic when we were trying to get to know each other. And he was cautious, we were cautious, but in the end, it worked out really, really well. He was honest. He was upfront. I think the biggest recommendation that I would make for somebody who is choosing a contractor and going through the process, other than, the obvious, make sure you verify references, talk to other people, ask them about timeframes. There's all these questions that we have to ask. But I think the most important thing is to do as much pre-selecting of your finishes as possible, because your budget, your proposal from this contractor, if it includes a lot of allowances, you really don't know where you're going to end up financially. And if your selections, or if your contractor budgets for, let's say flooring that costs $2 an hour or $2 a square foot, and you're picking one that costs $7, you're going to blow the budget. So it's so important to do your research, figure out what finishes you want to have, and make sure those finishes are reflected in your contract as much as possible to avoid surprises and change orders and unexpected line items.
So how would people go about choosing their finishes? Like, would they go to the contractor and say, hey, I'm thinking about getting an estimate from you, but I want it to be as accurate as possible? What finishes what are my options so that they can start looking? Or like, how do you even do that?
So it depends on the contractor. One of the reasons we really wanted to work with Rick and liked working with Rick was because he did have this kind of a showroom in his office. All he does is dental. That's it.
Cool.
So he had color schemes. He had an entire room full of samples. And that was incredibly helpful. We weren't trying to reinvent the wheel. We weren't building a Taj Mahal. We wanted a beautiful office done the right way. So we really walked in there and said, okay, this is what we want for floors. This is what we want for lighting. This is what we want for, you know, a couple of accent walls, like some wallpaper. And a lot of times he'll make collages with all the materials that you selected so that everything kind of goes together schematically and you can get a good visual for it. So it really helps to work with someone like that versus you going to ProSource or whatever other store and then telling your contractor, these are the materials. It works that way too, but he just made it so easy.
That's really cool. And it's cool that he had a bunch of almost like not pre-approved, but it's like any of these counter materials are going to work for dental offices, and any of these flooring materials are going to be easy to clean up and, with a dental office in mind. And so it's just so much of I guess this wouldn't even work. So it's like you can just see it and make a choice.
He was so easy. And then you have, all your ADA requirements, right? So you want somebody who knows what they're doing. You want someone who will tell you, well, you can't pick this dishwasher. Did you know that your dishwasher in your dental office had to be ADA compliant? I mean, who knew?
Oh my goodness. No.
Yeah. How about the kitchen? So let's say you have a kitchen, right? You have a little break room and you have a sink. So your sink has to be ADA compliant, and meaning that it cannot be too deep. So a person in a wheelchair has to have it be accessible to where they can reach the sink.
So we're talking the American Disabilities Association, or maybe I'm saying that wrong, not the American Dental Association.
Exactly. Not the Dental Association, the Americans with Disabilities Act.
That's right. Okay. And they're the ones that like certain stuff. If you've got 2 stories, you have to have an elevator versus just stairs. Because if someone has a wheelchair, certain businesses and certain commercial spaces. So I love this. I love that you found someone that you could respect and trust and facilitated the process and really knew what they were doing. That makes everything so much easier.
Oh, this whole process, and we've built practices before, but this particular time, he made it so easy for us, and he was so nice to work with, and lots of commercial builders can build you a dental practice. It's just a matter of how easy do you want the process to be? How much time do you have? And we were in a position where we didn't have a lot of time. We needed him to do this quickly.
Yeah.
We needed him to do it well. He had a full-time superintendent that was assigned to our job at all times.
Cool.
And these guys that he works with, a lot of them have been with him for over 20 years. So that tells you something, and they know exactly what they're doing. They know how the plumbing should work. They were open to some of the new ideas that we had that they've never done before. And they made it all work. They were fantastic. So yeah. And the cool thing is normally I micromanage everything, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'll normally be there every day, watch every little thing and pick up on things. With them, we felt like they had it completely under control. I didn't have to micromanage. They did it. They did it well. And
this is coming fresh off of we got burned by a contractor experience. So the hover instinct was probably very strong in you.
Very, very, very strong in me. But again, I felt like I could trust him, and they did not disappoint. So we were very, very happy.
That's so cool. Well, I'll wrap this up because unfortunately we gotta keep it around an hour because that's what we've budgeted for on our audio editing budget. But the one thing I will say was that same experience of you meeting and trusting and liking and just knowing what kind of person. You said it was Rick was his name?
Rick. Mm-hmm. Rick Whitley.
I kind of had the same experience this past weekend. I was at the Dental Success Summit in Phoenix for Mark Costas' event, and Jamie Amos was there. And he's someone that we've had on the show before, and he's someone that I've known people that have worked for him. I've known people that have worked with him. But there was a party at the Airbnb that I was staying at that went till midnight, put on by Zen Supplies by Tiger Safaroff.
Oh, yeah.
And Jamie was there, and I got to sit there. He was drinking a couple beers, and Jamie and I talked for a solid 30, 45 minutes. And I just really solidified that same gut feel of like, I like this guy. I trust this guy. He knows what he's doing. He also knows how much is too much. They only take on 7 clients a month. They won't help more than, at any given time, they know we can only do a great job on this many clients and just deliver. And so I got very much the same, like if anyone is ever kind of worried, like, who is that Jamie guy? Is he kind of sketchy? Like, no, he's legit. He's the real deal. And having talked with him for almost an hour, I got the same kind of feeling. So I don't know if you have any.
I have not had the pleasure of meeting him, but I have heard wonderful things about him as well. So
cool. Well, and I just want to recommend, because certain people are just worried, they're trying to do this startup alone, and maybe they don't have someone like Rick in their market. And Jamie is one that I am confident and comfortable referring people to. And I feel like that sometimes that's rare in the industry to have that same degree of confidence. There's no kickbacks. Jamie, if you want to sponsor the Shared Practices podcast, yours used to be Ideal Practices. So, we've even got kind of a similar name, but
yeah, that sounds like a match.
Yeah, no relationship there in terms of that. But I think we're going to have to continue this on next episode. So we'll have to wrap up with we talked about a lot of the good things that you did and a lot of your good experiences. We'll have to see if we can dig into any either not necessarily mistakes, but the bumps or the hiccups, and then the first few months in marketing. And then if we get time in next episode, then we'll totally dive into your advising others to do the same via startups and acquisitions. How does that sound?
That sounds perfect.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Olya Banchik. Thank you for being on the show, for being willing to share your story. We got into some really specific things today that I think are going to be super beneficial for our audience. So we'll talk with you next week.
Thank you. I look forward to it.
Awesome. Take care. See ya.